Joe's Inner Child Podcast.
Okay, Mark. Thank you so much for talking with me again. I actually spoke with you. I'm not sure if you remember.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. I'm so lucky to speak with you again. And
Oh, thanks, man.
let's just dive right in. So I've seen Trollhunters, the film, but I am not going to use any spoilery questions. So
Cool.
I wanted to ask you exactly when you started developing the film, if it was an idea before you had put out Three Below or all three of the series, or if this was something that you waited until all of those stories were told for.
Great question. It was a little bit of a fluid kind of decision-making process. We knew we wanted to end the trilogy with some sort of, Avengers-like pulling together of all of our characters. We went back and forth about what format that should take. We had kicked around the idea of maybe doing an extended season of Wizards and maybe continuing on, for 3 to 4 episodes. But that kind of felt a little bit anticlimactic to us, but the decision to do a film brought with it its own challenges, namely, how do you, if it's a continuation of Wizards, then all we really are requiring of the audience is that they're familiar with Wizards. With a feature film, you really have to make it sort of as standalone as possible. We went back and forth about, well, is that going to be achievable? Can you really wrap up a trilogy without requiring the audience to be familiar with the trilogy? And reasonable minds will probably debate and disagree over how successful or unsuccessful we were doing that.
Well, I think that the way you answered it was excellent, because that was basically the next question that I had. Was there anything that you feel like you would like? Okay, so now that you've brought these worlds together, are there any other worlds that haven't been involved that you would still be interested in introducing? Or is this something that you feel like if it goes forward, it would be more of like a continuing movie franchise?
That's a great question. I mean, our intention really was to wrap up the trilogy, for this, movie to be the final word, or the final chapter in this story. Look, I've learned the good way and the bad way, never say never, and never rule out anything. Anything's always possible. And without getting into spoiler territory, this story does have, while it's a definitive ending, it's, it opens the door for a whole host of new storytelling possibilities. I think it really was designed to be a capstone, and I suspect it'll remain that way for at least a little bit.
Yeah, of course. I wanted to know, I know you write the comics now for Trollhunters as well. Tales of Arcadia, I should say. Sorry. Do the comics involve all of the characters the characters from Wizards and Three Below as well, or is that specifically focused on Trollhunters?
They've been traditionally, historically, only focused on Trollhunters. We had talked about the possibility of doing a Wizards tie-in comic book series, but they never really got off the ground, which is a shame, because I love comic book tie-ins. I'm a big comic book fan, and I love when you can sort of have these ancillary stories that, can further flesh out a corner of that universe. I think it's always nice. Sometimes they're difficult to get going, and in the case of Wizards, we just sort of missed our opportunity.
Well, you have now done this movie and you brought everybody together. Do you think that that's something where if you did a comic that clashed everything together, do you feel like you would have to do the other comics prior, the way that you were talking about the argument was back and forth with this Avengers-style movie? Do you feel like comic book medium is a little bit different to how you could approach that team up?
Yeah, I think, there are huge differences between the medium of animation and the medium of comic books. And, I think it would depend upon sort of the our approach would have to be comic centric in order to justify doing the comic book. Also, it really would, I think, be dictated in large part about what is the story that we're telling. I try very hard to let the story try to drive a lot of the answers to these questions, rather than the reverse, where you're sort of retrofitting in certain things like format and medium and length to to the story. Let the story drive it, is always the best approach in my experience.
And I think that has obviously been seen in your work. So I definitely recognize that. Now, for Trollhunters, for people who are a little bit wary and haven't seen those series, like, can you say anything to them about how they don't need to watch those, how this was kind of approached in a way, kind of, if you're speaking to someone who hasn't seen those shows, what would you say to them to kind of comfort them and say, like, yo, dude, you'll enjoy this movie. You don't need to, you're not going to be asking yourself a million questions and Googling while you're watching it.
Well, I tell you, I always like to say Marvel gave us the answers to the test. And if you sort of look at their Avengers films as, the pooling together of all these characters from disparate movies, you don't have to watch, all the other Marvel movies in order to enjoy an Avengers film. And that was sort of the same approach we took with Rise of the Titans. And we also did write and animate a brand new sort of opening sequence that's really designed to be a saga cell for anyone who hasn't seen any of the shows.
Yeah, and I thought that was great. I was actually going to mention that as well, because I'd seen, I haven't seen every episode of Wizards, so I've seen,
Right.
a lot. But that beginning does a great job of tying it up and teeing up the, what's to come. I wanted to know if there are going to be any more like final trailers released before the actual movie comes out, or is it so close now that we've seen everything we're going to see?
That's a great question. Believe it or not, I'm not privy to those sort of marketing plans. So I honestly don't know. I don't know. I don't know if they have another trailer up their sleeves or not.
So I know Wizards it wasn't so long ago, but can you give me a timeline of when you guys initially started working on this film? Like the actual like plot and stuff, and when you got a planned release for Netflix, when did you guys start working on it at that level of it?
Great question. My recollection was that we started Wizards contemporaneous with our discussions about the movie. So for a good long time, at least from a writing perspective, we were proceeding along parallel tracks. So it's funny. It's a little bit like the end of Star Trek: The Next Generation, the movie Star Trek Generations. From a production standpoint, we basically finished Wizards and rolled straight into production of the movie. But in order to achieve that, we had to be writing on the movie while Wizards was being written and produced.
So, do you know if there were any sequences that you had planned to include in one of the series that didn't working, that worked a lot better for this movie? If there was anything in this movie that was initially a scrapped idea from something earlier on for one of the three series on their own?
That's a great question. I got to tell you, the story development process for the movie was really very lengthy, and the finished product bears little resemblance to the story we were originally contemplating. And there was, between those extremes, there were a lot of different iterations. So pretty much everything got discussed. A lot of things got bandied about. There's a million and one ideas and sequences that, were discussed, in some cases even written, dropped, changed, you name it. It was a very, very fluid process, because we really wanted to make sure we were telling the right story. And I think in order to do that, you got to go down a lot of blind alleys and sort of, stress test various different story ideas and story points and to arrive at, hopefully the best version of the story.
Would you say that same answer kind of also applies to Legends of Tomorrow? Because Legends of Tomorrow is such a wacky, zany, crazy thing. I feel like there's probably ideas that you guys were able to use in that show that the kind of the laws and the genres, like more timid genres of the previous shows wouldn't allow. Was there anything that kind of happened like that where you're like, oh, Legends, I get to finally do this?
Yeah, there were certainly a lot of instances of that, but also a lot of instances where um, an idea that was generated in the writer's room, say in season 2, didn't see fruition until season 4. That happens a lot with Legends, where there are all these whiteboards in the writer's room, and at the beginning of the season, a lot of like ideas for time periods or ideas for types of episodes get written down. And I always say, like, even when you do 15 episodes, or like on Arrow when we would do 23, there are still always ideas that for whatever reason you don't have the time to get to in the season, and they get carried forward into other seasons, which is great because you always feel like you've got some material to be able to work off of or platform off of, and you're not always at the beginning of each season facing a set of blank whiteboards.
I love that you have, like, I imagine the whiteboards because of all the things that can happen in Legends, which is literally anything. I love how that's been embraced more and more. Rasputin, I was talking to Michael Eklund, and I love that you brought him back as Rasputin because he was also doll maker, and you were not afraid to, like, he's such a good character actor. You're like, you can do this, and it's completely different. What a wacky episode. Like, that's a perfect kind of example of things that aren't timid that work out great in that show. How involved are you still with that? I know you've been really working on Trollhunters, between you did the comics and now you had the movie, and you've also got Green Lantern coming up. How heavily are you still working with Legends?
Very, very tangentially, if at all. I was mostly involved this year or past year. I was probably mostly involved with the Beebo Christmas Special that we've got coming out, that I'm really, really excited about. Apart from that, I get all the story documents, I get all the scripts, I get the cuts, I watch them, but I really try very hard to sort of stay out of the writing room's way. Phil Klemmer and Keto Shimizu, who are running the show in season 7, they have an incredible staff, and they really do not need my interference or screwing anything up.
Well, and I think you've built like a great family of writers on those series and creatives on across those series. But I've noticed that a couple of them are going with you, along to Green Lantern. And I don't want to ask anything about that because it's way too far ahead. But do you feel like Arrow, can you say, at least like for fans of what was the Arrowverse, now the CW verse, will there be any elements from like your creative fingerprint as all creatives from that universe that people can see on HBO Max?
That's a great question. I mean, it's Green Lantern. We're approaching it as doing it distinct from the Arrowverse. It's not going to have any sort of creative tendrils. But yeah, like, myself, Greg Berlanti, Lamont McGee, Jeff Johns, like, we're, all, we've all got experience in the Arrowverse, and I'm sure that, in some way, shape, or form, the sensibilities, but also the lessons. We've learned a lot of lessons across doing these, shows, both from a creative standpoint and a production standpoint. And I'm sure that we'll be bringing, that experience to bear as we get deeper and deeper into the series.
Did you have a tie-in, a part to play in this Green Lantern series from the beginning, or was it more because of you having been a part of a decade ago, the previous version, that you were brought into it?
Well, I think it really was a function of, Greg and I have worked together for, 16 years now. We've worked together on a lot of different things, some DC related, some not DC related. He came to me years ago now, with the idea of, DC is letting us do a Green Lantern series for their streaming service. would you want to be involved? And I said, of course, because of the movie and that experience, there's a strong desire on my part and on Greg's part to get right what had been gotten wrong 10 years ago.
I'm so excited for Kilowog. But I don't want to talk anymore about Green Lantern. I know no spoilers. So last question about Legends. You said the Beebo Christmas Special. I actually hadn't heard about that. Can you tell me anything about what's to come with that, or what people can expect?
It is pure joy. It is. I can tell you, it's called Beebo Saves Christmas. And Beebo does save Christmas, and we'll learn more about the Bows, as we like to call his race of people. And it's got musical numbers that are brilliant. It's got Santa Claus. It's got everything Christmas that you could possibly want. And I'm super excited about it because obviously it's Beebo, and anything related to Beebo is always a lot of fun. But this is, Beebo in a different medium. This is in animation, which is terrific because the design for Beebo came. I'm going to bring everything full circle in this interview. The design for Beebo came from Linda Chen, who is one of our longtime artists on Trollhunters. So there's a genetic Trollhunter Beebo connection. So it's just nice to see all that stuff come to fruition.
That's going to be perfect. And I know that you're going to have to go, but I always like to let people wrap up and give them a little platform to say anything you'd like to say, or, plug anything you need to plug, social media or project wise.
Ooh, good question. Well, you can find me on Twitter at M Guggenheim. I'm not super prolific on Twitter these days. I haven't seen much of a reason to be. But I have a lot of things in the pipeline. 99% of it hasn't been announced. Probably after Rise of the Titans comes out, the next thing out from me will be a mini series, comic book series that I'm writing for Dark Horse called Last Flight Out. And it's my return to creator-owned comics, which I've actually been writing a ton of during the pandemic. So this is just the beginning of what will hopefully be a mini series of different comic book stories.
That's so fantastic to hear. And I know you got to go. I hope we talk again in the future. Thank you so much for spending time with me, brother.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a great day and enjoy the rest of your interviews.
You too.
Literary Joe's Inner Child Podcast.